Hello, everyone. Tonight we are setting sail on a journey through tempestuous seas, where hidden coves, stolen treasures, and swashbuckling adventures await. Close your eyes and imagine the salty spray on your face, the creak of timbers beneath your feet, and the distant chilling echo of a pirate shanty across the moonlit waves. Feel the thrill of the chase, the glint of steel, and the undeniable allure of a life lived outside the law. Be warned, though, in this world, a quick wit and a sharp cutlass were often the only things standing between you and a watery grave. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see how far these tales travel. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. The word pirate probably conjures images of eye-patched swashbucklers, buried treasure maps, and parrots perched on shoulders. You might picture Captain Jack Sparrow or Blackbeard looming large on a smoke-filled deck. But the truth is, piracy is a tale as old as seafaring itself. Long before the Golden Age, we often romanticize the seas were dangerous places, and not just because of storms. From the moment humans first pushed offshore in rudimentary vessels, there were always those who saw another's cargo as their own. So when we talk about ancient seafaring rogues, we're reaching back into the mists of history well past the 17th and 18th centuries. Imagine the early Bronze Age around 3000 BCE. Trade routes were emerging across the Mediterranean and beyond, connecting burgeoning civilizations. Think about Egyptian grain ships heading to the Levant, or Minoan vessels laden with copper and tin. These were tempting targets. Without organized navies or international law as we understand it, a quick, well-armed vessel could easily overwhelm a slower, cargo-heavy merchant ship. The earliest recorded mentions of piracy come from ancient texts. The Amarna letters, a collection of diplomatic correspondence between Egyptian pharaohs and their Canaanite vassals from around the 14th century BCE, explicitly mention raiding by groups known as the Sea Peoples, disrupting trade and causing havoc in the eastern Mediterranean. This is an authoritative historical fact, showing that piracy was a recognized problem even then. These weren't pirates in the romantic sense with codes and skull and crossbones flags. They were more like maritime bandits, opportunists who saw an easy score. Their motivations were simple survival, acquisition of goods, and perhaps a bit of mischief depending on the day. They likely operated close to shore, ambushing vessels in coastal waters or narrow straits. Their vessels wouldn't have been grand galleons, but smaller, faster ships easy to hide and maneuver in shallower waters. Imagine a tiny fishing boat suddenly turning into an armed menace, a truly terrifying thought if you were a slow-moving merchant ship. The methods were rudimentary but effective. Ramming grappling hooks and hand-to-hand combat would have been the order of the day. There were no cannons, no elaborate rigging, just raw, brutal force. The stakes were incredibly high. Capture often meant slavery death, or at best the loss of everything you owned. So if you were a merchant during this time, you probably wouldn't survive this. Every voyage was a gamble against the elements and against human greed. Historians still debate whether these early raiders were distinct, dedicated pirate groups or simply impoverished coastal communities turning to plunder during hard times, or even disgruntled sailors. It's hard to tell from fragmented records, but the outcome was the same for the victim. A quirky or off-topic fact related to this era: ancient Roman ships sometimes carried dogs specifically trained to deter pirates, proving that even back then, a good boy could be your best defense against bad guys. Who knew canine companions were part of maritime security? Over the centuries, as civilizations rose and fell, so too did the forms of piracy. The Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans all faced their own versions of maritime marauders. The Roman Republic at one point was so plagued by piracy in the Mediterranean that it severely disrupted grain supplies, leading to a major military campaign led by Pompey the Great to eradicate them in 67 BCE. This operation was surprisingly successful, showcasing that organized state power could at least temporarily suppress the threat. But piracy, like a persistent barnacle, always found a way to reattach itself to the hull of maritime trade. It was a constant shadow on the seas, adapting and evolving with the ships and the wealth they carried. From the sun-drenched waters of the Mediterranean, our journey now takes a sharp turn north into the chillier, mist-shrouded seas of northern Europe. Here, another formidable group of ancient seafaring rogues rose to prominence, becoming synonymous with raids, plunder, and longships, the Vikings. When you think of Vikings, you probably picture horned helmets, a myth, by the way. They didn't actually wear those in battle, and fierce warriors sweeping down from Scandinavia. And you'd be right to picture them as formidable, though their story is far more complex than simple pillaging. The Viking Age, roughly from the late 8th to the mid-11th century, wasn't just about piracy, but it certainly played a huge part. These Norsemen were explorers, traders, settlers, and yes, raiders. Their ships, the famous longships, were engineering marvels. They were shallow-drafted, allowing them to navigate both open oceans and shallow rivers, giving them unparalleled access to inland towns and monasteries that thought themselves safe from maritime attack. Imagine waking up to find a sleek dragon-headed vessel gliding silently up your local river full of heavily armed individuals. You probably wouldn't survive this if you were a monk in Lindisfarne in 793 CE, famously one of the first recorded Viking raids on a monastery. That's an authoritative historical fact that sent shivers down the spine of medieval Europe. The Vikings' motivations for raiding were varied. Sometimes it was simply plunder, silver, gold, slaves, anything valuable. Other times it was land or establishing trade routes, or even seeking new places to settle when their homelands became overcrowded. They weren't operating under a pirate code in the sense of the later Caribbean buccaneers. Their actions were often part of broader tribal or kingdom-level warfare, or simply opportunistic freelance ventures. They certainly weren't flying a Jolly Roger. Their banners would have been much more personalized, often depicting ravens or other fearsome animals. Their tactics were swift and brutal: land quickly overwhelm with ferocity, seize what they could, and disappear before local defenses could muster. They were experts in hit-and-run raids. This wasn't about leisurely cruises or protracted sieges. It was about speed and shock. The reputation they built was one of terror, so much so that a prayer emerged across Europe. From the fury of the Northmen, O Lord, deliver us. It's a pretty strong review, don't you think? Historians still debate whether Viking raids were primarily driven by a search for wealth overpopulation in Scandinavia, or a response to growing Frankish power on the continent. The truth is likely a combination of these factors, varying by region and by individual group. A quirky or off-topic fact about Vikings: despite their fearsome reputation, many were meticulously groomed and quite keen on hygiene, even carrying personal grooming kits that included ear spoons and tweezers. So not quite the smelly, rough-and-tumble image you might have in your head. Maybe they were just trying to look good for their next raid, for intimidation purposes. While the Vikings eventually transitioned from pure raiders to settlers and established kingdoms, their impact on the maritime landscape was undeniable. They demonstrated the vulnerability of coastal and riverine communities to well-organized, highly mobile sea forces. They proved that a fearsome reputation could be as powerful a weapon as any axe or sword. Their legacy, though often romanticized, is a crucial chapter in the long, bloody history of piracy, laying some of the foundational ideas of maritime marauding that would in different forms reappear centuries later. They certainly weren't worried about whether their crocodile poop sunscreen was waterproof. They were too busy being terrifying. Having sailed with the longships of the Vikings, we now journey back to the sun-drenched, often turbulent waters of the Mediterranean Sea. This ancient cradle of civilization, a bustling highway of trade for millennia, was also a hotbed of maritime predation where a different kind of pirate flourished, the corsairs. Unlike the broad-stroke raids of the Vikings, corsair activity was often tied to state-sponsored warfare, blurring the lines between legitimate naval action and outright piracy. You see, the Mediterranean wasn't just a single sea. It was a patchwork of competing empires, kingdoms, and city-states, particularly after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. With Venice, Genoa, the Ottoman Empire, and various Christian powers vying for control, the sea became a chessboard of conflict. In this environment, states often issued letters of marque or similar authorizations to private individuals, allowing them to seize the ships and goods of enemy nations. These individuals were known as privateers. But when their activities went beyond the bounds of their letters, or when they simply targeted anyone for plunder, they were indistinguishable from pirates. This system gave rise to both Christian and Barbary corsairs. The Barbary corsairs. Operating primarily from the North African coast, cities like Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli were particularly notorious. From the 16th to the early 19th centuries, these Muslim corsairs, often under the nominal authority of the Ottoman Empire, preyed on Christian shipping and raided coastal towns in Europe, seizing cargo and, more significantly, capturing people for ransom or enslavement. This was a massive enterprise. An authoritative historical fact is that it's estimated between 1 million and 1.25 million Europeans were enslaved by Barbary corsairs from the 16th to the 19th centuries. Imagine a bustling port city, its inhabitants living in constant fear of a sudden appearance of these raiders sweeping in to carry off their loved ones. You probably wouldn't survive this if you were caught unwary on the coast. On the other side, Christian corsairs. Operating from places like Malta, Livorno, and Messina, retaliated by raiding Muslim shipping and coastal areas. It was a vicious tit-for-tat cycle of maritime warfare and plunder, driven by religious and economic animosity. They were pirates to their victims, but heroes to their patrons. This constant state of conflict meant that even seemingly legitimate mariners often had a streak of the rogue within them. The ships used by corsairs were typically nimble galleys or smaller sailing vessels designed for speed and close-quarters combat, often employing oarsmen for maneuverability in calm waters. Their tactics involved swift boarding actions, overwhelming the enemy with sheer numbers and brute force. They weren't focused on sinking ships, but on capturing them intact along with their valuable cargo and, crucially, their crews and passengers. Historians still debate whether Barbary corsairs were truly pirates or more akin to privateers engaged in a form of holy war. The distinction is blurry and often depended on whose side you were on. A quirky or off-topic fact, the famous novel Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes includes a character who was captured by Barbary corsairs and spent years as a slave in Algiers, a fate that Cervantes himself endured for 5 years. Talk about writing what you know right. It just goes to show how pervasive this threat was to everyday life and travel in the Mediterranean. The era of Mediterranean corsairs demonstrates how political and religious conflicts could fuel maritime predation, blurring the lines between legal warfare and criminal enterprise. It laid some of the groundwork for the later, more organized forms of privateering in the Atlantic, showing how states could effectively outsource their naval power to ambitious and often ruthless individuals, sometimes losing control of them in the process. The seeds of the golden age of piracy, in a strange way, were sown in these complex, contested waters. From the intertwined conflicts of the Mediterranean, we now shift our gaze westward towards the burgeoning Atlantic, where empires were expanding and new wealth was flowing across the oceans. This is where the concept of privateering truly came into its own, becoming a legal loophole. that legitimized, at least in the eyes of some nations, what would otherwise be considered outright piracy. If the corsairs blurred the lines, privateers erased them with a royal stamp. Imagine a time when national navies were relatively small and seafaring was incredibly expensive. Kings and queens eager to harass their rivals' shipping, but lacking the resources for full-scale naval warfare, found a clever workaround. They issued letters of marque and reprisal to private ship owners and captains. These official government documents authorized the bearer to attack and seize the vessel's cargo, and sometimes even the crews of enemy nations during wartime. The privateer got to keep a large portion of the spoils, often 80–90%, while the monarch received a cut, usually 10–20%, and the added benefit of weakened enemies. It was, in essence, state-sanctioned piracy for profit. This system flourished during periods of intense geopolitical rivalry, particularly between England, Spain, France, and the Netherlands from the 16th to the 18th centuries. When a country was at war, its privateers became its unofficial decentralized navy. An authoritative historical fact during the Anglo-Spanish War, 1585–1604, English privateers, often called sea dogs, captured hundreds of Spanish ships, inflicting immense economic damage on Spain. This wasn't petty thievery, it was a strategic arm of national policy. The allure of privateering was immense. For ambitious captains, it offered a chance for immense wealth, social advancement, and even a degree of national heroism. You could be a patriot and get rich doing it. You were raiding, yes, but it was legal. Raiding provided you stuck to the rules of your letter of marque. The distinction between a privateer and a pirate, however, was often razor thin. If you attacked a ship from a neutral country, or if you continued raiding after peace was declared, your legal status vanished, and you instantly became a pirate, liable to be hanged. Imagine trying to explain to an angry Spanish captain after you've just taken his cargo that you're actually a legal maritime entrepreneur. Good luck with that. You probably wouldn't survive this argument. Historians still debate whether privateering truly served as an effective naval strategy or merely fueled general lawlessness on the high seas, laying the groundwork for the later golden age of piracy by training a generation of ruthless mariners in the art of plunder. Some argue it was a necessary evil for nations without large standing navies. A quirky or off-topic fact: privateers were often required to post a bond, a sum of money or property, as a guarantee that they would adhere to the terms of their letter of marque. So even back then there was paperwork and a financial commitment to legitimate plunder. It's almost like they had an early version of maritime insurance, but for stealing. The golden age of privateering ultimately waned as national navies grew larger and more professional. The practice was eventually outlawed by most major powers with the Declaration of Paris in 1856, though it persisted in some forms. But its legacy is undeniable. It established a precedent for large-scale organized maritime raiding, provided training and experience to thousands of sailors in the arts of combat and plunder, and fostered an environment where the lines between legal and illegal maritime activity were perpetually blurred. Many future pirates of the Golden Age would cut their teeth and their enemies' throats under the banner of a privateering commission, only to find the transition to outright piracy a surprisingly short leap. From the legal ambiguities of privateering, we now turn our attention to its most famous practitioners, the Elizabethan sea dogs. These were not just any privateers. They were legendary figures, part adventurers, part patriots, and part ruthless opportunists who carved their names into history by striking at the heart of the mighty Spanish Empire. When you think of swashbuckling heroes in service of a queen, you're likely thinking of these daring individuals. Imagine England in the late 16th century, a rising but still comparatively smaller power challenging the colossal might of Spain, which was growing rich on the silver and gold flowing from its American colonies. Queen Elizabeth I, shrewd and pragmatic, found eager agents in her sea dogs. These captains, like Sir Francis Drake, were given royal commissions to raid Spanish shipping and settlements ostensibly as acts of war, but also with the clear understanding that any treasure captured would be shared with the crown. It was a wildly profitable venture for both sides if they were successful. Sir Francis Drake is without a doubt the most famous of these figures. An authoritative historical fact is that Drake completed the second circumnavigation of the world between 1577 and 1580, capturing immense Spanish treasure along the way. His exploits were legendary, earning him a knighthood from Queen Elizabeth herself and the undying hatred of the Spanish who called him El Drake, the Dragon. Imagine the audacity sailing into Spanish-controlled ports in the Pacific, where no English ship had ever dared to venture, and making off with vast quantities of silver. It took serious nerve and a bit of luck to pull that off. You probably wouldn't survive this kind of daring feat unless you were as cunning and skilled as Drake. The Sea Dogs operated with a blend of audacious courage and calculated brutality. They were masters of naval combat for their time, employing fast, maneuverable ships and accurate gunnery to overwhelm Spanish galleons. Their motivation wasn't just gold. It was also a fervent Protestantism, a deep-seated anti-Spanish sentiment, and a desire to elevate England's standing in the world. They saw themselves as crusaders striking a blow against Catholic Spain and its perceived tyranny. This mix of piety and plunder made them complex, often contradictory figures. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth I truly sanctioned Drake's more aggressive actions in times of nominal peace, or if she simply turned a blind eye to his lucrative freelance operations. It's safe to say she appreciated the gold he brought back more than the diplomatic headaches he caused. A quirky or off-topic fact about Drake: he was supposedly the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe as captain, and during his voyage he reportedly introduced potatoes to England, though this is debated. So you might owe your next plate of chips to a pirate patriot. The era of the Elizabethan sea dogs exemplifies how privateering could elevate individuals from humble beginnings to national heroes. It trained a generation of highly skilled, aggressive mariners who understood how to wage war on the seas for profit. While their direct actions were technically legal under their letters of marque, the line between their exploits and outright piracy was often blurred, especially in the eyes of their victims. As the Anglo-Spanish Wars eventually waned, many of these trained privateers would find themselves unemployed, but still possessing a taste for maritime plunder, setting the stage for new forms of piracy to emerge in different parts of the world, particularly in the burgeoning colonies of the West Indies. Our maritime narrative now steers directly into the sun-drenched, palm-fringed, and often blood-soaked waters of the Caribbean. This is where the next distinct breed of seafaring rogues emerged, setting the stage for what we commonly call the Golden Age of piracy, the buccaneers. They didn't start as pirates, not exactly. Their origins are rooted in a rough-and-tumble existence on the fringes of European colonial power. Imagine, if you will, the early 17th century. The Spanish Main was alive with treasure ships, but the islands of the West Indies were vast, wild, and largely ungoverned by any strong European power. French, English, and Dutch adventurers, often escaped indentured servants or shipwrecked sailors, found themselves living on the western side of Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. They weren't sailors, they were hunters. Their primary trade was curing wild oxen and pigs using a smoking process learned from the native Taino people. The smoked meat was called boucan, and those who prepared it became known as boucaniers, which morphed into buccaneers. These early buccaneers were a hardy, independent lot. They lived a brutal existence, hunting in the wilderness, often clashing with Spanish authorities, who saw them as interlopers. They became highly skilled with firearms and knives, self-reliant and fiercely loyal to their comrades. Their very lifestyle, steeped in violence and self-sufficiency, primed them for a shift in profession. An authoritative historical fact, the term buccaneer originally referred specifically to these hunters on Hispaniola and Tortuga, not broadly to all Caribbean pirates. This distinct origin sets them apart from earlier maritime raiders. The shift occurred as Spanish efforts to eradicate them intensified. The Spanish repeatedly destroyed their hunting grounds and drove them from Hispaniola. Forced off the land with their traditional livelihood gone, these hardened frontiersmen turned their skills to the sea. They were already accustomed to fighting and living by their wits, and the wealth of Spanish shipping provided a far more lucrative target than wild boars. They began raiding small, poorly defended Spanish vessels operating from makeshift bases on remote islands. Imagine being a Spanish merchant captain seeing a motley crew of incredibly rough-looking men covered in animal hides and gunpowder residue approaching your ship in a small, fast vessel. You probably wouldn't survive this encounter without losing your cargo and quite possibly your life. Their methods were direct board the enemy, fight ferociously, and take what they could. They often used small, agile boats favoring surprise attacks. They didn't initially have the grand, heavily armed ships of later pirates. Their power came from their experience in brutal close-quarters combat. Historians still debate whether the buccaneers' shift to piracy was a pure economic decision or largely a retaliatory act against Spanish aggression. It's likely a mix fueled by a desire for survival and a thirst for vengeance. A quirky or off-topic fact about the buccaneers: their hunting technique involved smoking meat on a wooden frame called a barbacoa, which is where we get our modern word barbecue. So in a strange way, your backyard cookout has a linguistic link to these rough-and-tumble Caribbean characters. Who knew that a delicious meal could be a callback to ruthless hunters turned pirates? The buccaneers eventually found a more secure base in Tortuga, an island off the coast of Hispaniola, which we'll discuss next. Their transition from land-based hunters to sea raiders marks a pivotal moment. They were a new breed of pirate forged in the crucible of colonial conflict, with a unique blend of wilderness survival skills and a profound hatred for Spanish authority. Their emergence signaled the true beginning of large-scale organized piracy in the New World, laying the groundwork for the more famous captains of the Golden Age. They certainly weren't concerned with whether their pirate flags clashed with their cured meats. We've charted the rough transition of the buccaneers from land-based hunters to sea raiders. This shift, however, required something crucial: a safe harbor, a place to rest, resupply, and carouse without the constant threat of imperial navies. And for a significant period in the 17th century, that place was Tortuga, which became the quintessential pirate stronghold in the Caribbean. Imagine a small, rugged island barely 40 square miles just off the northwest coast of Hispaniola. Its name, Tortuga, means turtle in Spanish due to its shape. For the buccaneers, it was perfectly situated. Its proximity to the lucrative Spanish trade routes, particularly the Windward Passage, which funneled Spanish treasure fleets, made it an ideal launching point for raids. More importantly, its natural defenses, a rocky, inhospitable coastline on its northern side, and a sheltered southern harbor made it difficult for larger, deeper-drafted warships to approach. This geographic advantage transformed it from a mere hunting ground into a formidable bastion. Tortuga became a truly international hub for these early Caribbean freebooters. French, English, and Dutch buccaneers coexisted, forming a rough-and-ready society based on shared grievance against Spain and the pursuit of plunder. It wasn't a pristine, organized city, but a chaotic, bustling, and often violent den of sailors, hunters, merchants, and prostitutes. It was a place where fortunes could be made and lost in a single night. An authoritative historical fact: by the mid-17th century, Tortuga served as the de facto capital of buccaneering, attracting thousands of adventurers seeking freedom and riches. If you were a lone, disillusioned sailor seeking a new life away from the tyranny of naval discipline, this was probably your dream destination. Life on Tortuga would have been a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchy of naval ships or the structured life in European cities. Here, a rough form of democracy prevailed among the buccaneers. Decisions were often made by consensus, and loot was divided according to prearranged agreements. There was a camaraderie, a sense of shared risk and reward that bound these men together. Imagine the taverns filled with raucous laughter, the clinking of stolen coins, and the endless spinning of tall tales, each one grander than the last. You probably wouldn't survive this environment if you were prone to easily offending people or had a strong moral compass. Tortuga's status as a pirate haven wasn't entirely due to its natural defenses and its inhabitants' fierce independence. Various European powers, particularly France, periodically tried to assert control over it, often in a half-hearted attempt to legitimize the buccaneers' activities against Spain, or simply to deny the island to rivals. This constant shifting of allegiances and control only added to its chaotic, lawless reputation. Historians still debate whether Tortuga's influence was more as a symbolic heartland of piracy or as a truly strategic military base for buccaneering operations. It probably served both roles. A quirky or off-topic fact about Tortuga: despite its wild reputation, the buccaneers often observed a strict though unwritten code among themselves on the island, including rules for dividing spoils and treating comrades, a precursor to the more formalized pirate codes that would emerge later. So even in the heart of chaos, there was a certain method to their madness. You might even say they had their own version of community guidelines, just with more drinking and less online moderation. The influence of Tortuga as a pirate stronghold cannot be overstated. It provided a crucial base for the burgeoning buccaneer movement, allowing them to consolidate their power, resupply, and plan increasingly ambitious raids. It was a melting pot of nationalities and grievances, forging a unique pirate culture that would, in time, spread throughout the Caribbean and beyond, laying the definitive groundwork for the coming golden age of piracy. The stories born on its shores would echo for centuries. We've charted the origins of piracy from ancient Mediterranean bandits to Viking longships through the legal labyrinth of privateering, and finally to the rise of the rough and tumble buccaneers of Tortuga. All these threads converge slowly but surely to bring us to the era that truly defines piracy in the popular imagination, the golden age of piracy. This wasn't a single continuous period, but rather a series of distinct waves of intense pirate activity, predominantly in the Atlantic and Caribbean, stretching roughly from the mid-17th century to the mid-18th century. Imagine a perfect storm of factors brewing: growing global trade, creating more tempting targets, declining opportunities for privateering, as European wars temporarily ceased a surplus of skilled but unemployed sailors, many with combat experience from naval or privateer service, and distant, often weak colonial administrations. Add to that the harsh conditions of legitimate merchant or naval service, brutal discipline, poor pay, dreadful food, and high mortality rates. And the allure of a pirate's life, with its promise of freedom, wealth, however ephemeral, and a rough sort of democracy, became incredibly strong. This confluence of circumstances saw the Golden Age truly take hold. The first major wave, sometimes called the buccaneering period, peaked from about 1660 to 1688 with figures like Henry Morgan. These were the buccaneers we discussed, evolving from hunters to sea raiders, operating largely with the tacit or sometimes explicit support of colonial governors, who saw them as useful deterrents against Spanish power. They focused primarily on Spanish targets, often launching large-scale land attacks on coastal towns, not just ship-to-ship encounters. An authoritative historical fact, Henry Morgan, initially a buccaneer, transitioned into a respected privateer and later even served as lieutenant governor of Jamaica, illustrating the fluid boundaries of the time. Imagine making so much money from raiding that you get a fancy government job. Goals. The second wave, often referred to as the pirate round, from the 1690s saw pirates venturing far beyond the Caribbean, targeting rich Mughal Empire ships in the Indian Ocean. Captain Kidd, whom we'll meet later, was a key figure in this period. The third and perhaps most famous wave, lasting from about 1716 to 1726, is what most people typically think of as the Golden Age proper, featuring legendary figures like Blackbeard Bartholomew Roberts and Anne Bonny. These pirates preyed on all nationalities, driven by a desire for wealth and a rejection of oppressive maritime authority. You probably wouldn't survive this era as a merchant captain without a very strong escort or a lot of luck. The ships of this era were often purpose-built or expertly captured and modified vessels, prioritizing speed and maneuverability over brute force, though they carried increasingly heavy armaments. They honed their boarding tactics, aiming to capture ships intact, rather than sinking them, preserving the cargo and potentially recruiting new crew members. Pirates of this period developed a unique culture, including distinctive flags, elaborate codes of conduct, and a reputation for ferocity that often allowed them to intimidate targets into surrender without a fight. Historians still debate the exact start and end dates of the Golden Age as pirate activity waxed and waned in different regions, but the core characteristics remain consistent: a proliferation of large, well-organized pirate crews, widespread attacks on maritime trade, and the emergence of charismatic, often ruthless pirate captains who became legends in their own time. A quirky or off-topic fact: during this period, some pirates would intentionally leave survivors to spread tales of their ferocity, knowing that fear was a powerful weapon. It was like early marketing, but with more dread and less jingles. The Golden Age was not just about violence and plunder. It was a rejection of the rigid social hierarchies and brutal conditions of the legitimate maritime world. For many, piracy offered a brief, albeit dangerous taste of freedom, wealth, and self-governance. This was the era that gave birth to many of the enduring myths and images we associate with pirates, setting the stage for their cultural immortality. So the Golden Age of piracy has fully taken hold, a period brimming with swashbuckling tales and untold riches. But what was the one symbol that struck fear into the hearts of sailors across the globe, instantly recognizable even today? It was, of course, the Jolly Roger, the infamous pirate flag. This wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a potent psychological weapon designed to terrify and intimidate. Imagine seeing a ship on the horizon, its sails full, bearing down on your merchant vessel. At first, it might fly the flag of a friendly nation or no flag at all. But then, as it gets closer, just before the attack, the true colors are revealed. Up goes the black banner, emblazoned with a white skull and crossbones, or perhaps an hourglass, a skeleton, or even a bleeding heart. The message was clear: surrender or face a bloody, potentially fatal fight. This sudden unveiling of the pirate flag was a chilling signal, and its psychology was expertly employed. The Jolly Roger served multiple purposes. Firstly, it was a declaration of intent. It told the target vessel unequivocally that this was a pirate ship, not a privateer who would fly a national flag or a regular warship. This distinct visual identity was crucial for building their fearsome reputation. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, it was a tool for intimidation. The symbols on the flag were carefully chosen to evoke death, mortality, and terror. A skull and crossbones, for instance, immediately signals death. An hourglass warns that time is running out. A skeleton ready to strike means no quarter will be given. An authoritative historical fact is that flying the Jolly Roger typically indicated that pirates would show mercy and take prisoners if the target surrendered without a fight. If a ship resisted a red flag might be hoisted instead, signaling no quarter given and a bloody massacre. You probably wouldn't survive this latter scenario. This psychological warfare was often highly effective. Many merchant captains faced with the sight of the Jolly Roger opted to surrender immediately rather than risk their lives and the lives of their crew in a futile battle. This allowed pirates to capture ships and cargo largely intact, saving them powder and shot, and minimizing casualties on both sides. A pragmatic, if terrifying, approach. Think about it, why fight when you can just scare them into giving up? It's far less work and you still get all the loot. Historians still debate the exact origins of the term Jolly Roger. Some theories suggest it derives from the French Joli Rouge, pretty red, referring to a blood-red flag flown by early privateers, while others link it to various mythical or demonic figures. Regardless of its etymology, its iconic status was cemented during the Golden Age. A quirky or off-topic fact: not all pirate flags were the classic skull and crossbones. Bartholomew Roberts, for example, famously flew a flag depicting himself standing on two skulls, one labeled AM, a Martinique head, and the other AA, a Barbadian head symbolizing his victory over those islands. Now that's what I call personalized branding. The evolution of the Jolly Roger from various individual pirate designs into the universally recognized symbol it is today is a testament to its effectiveness as a brand. It wasn't just a flag. It was a carefully crafted message, a promise of terror, and a grim invitation to surrender. It solidified the image of the pirate in the minds of sailors and landsmen alike, a symbol that continues to capture our imagination, reminding us of a time when a piece of cloth could hold the power of life and death on the high seas. The Jolly Roger, a fearsome brand, heralded the arrival of pirates. But what happened once they were aboard, and how did these motley crews, often comprised of individuals from disparate backgrounds, actually function? This brings us to a fascinating aspect of pirate life: the pirate code. Far from being simply lawless anarchists, many pirate crews operated under a set of surprisingly structured, often democratic rules. Imagine stepping aboard a pirate ship. You might expect chaos, but what you'd often find was a highly organized, though brutal, society. These codes, or articles, were not universal. Each ship or captain often had their own specific set of rules, usually drawn up and agreed upon by the crew themselves. Before setting sail on a new cruise, every crew member would sign or make their mark, if illiterate, these articles, effectively consenting to their terms. This act of signing was crucial. It meant that breaking the code was a breach of contract with your shipmates, not just defiance of a captain. The pirate code typically covered several key areas. Firstly, the division of plunder. This was perhaps the most vital article. It specified how treasure would be shared, often giving the captain and quartermaster a slightly larger share, perhaps 1.5 or 2 shares, but ensuring that ordinary crew members received a full share, a stark contrast to the abysmal wages on merchant or naval ships. Injured crew members often received compensation for lost limbs or eyes, a rudimentary form of insurance. An authoritative historical fact: Bartholomew Roberts's code stipulated that any man losing a limb in battle would receive 800 pieces of 8 from the common stock. Imagine getting injured and actually getting paid for it, rather than just being left for dead, a surprisingly progressive benefit for the era. Secondly, the code dictated discipline and daily life. Rules on gambling, fighting aboard ship, extinguishing lights at a certain hour, and even cleaning weapons were common. Disobedience, cowardice in battle, or theft from a shipmate could result in severe punishments ranging from marooning, being left alone on a deserted island with a bottle of water and a pistol. You probably wouldn't survive this, to flogging or even death. It's like a very strict HOA, but with actual life or death consequences for forgetting to take out the trash. Thirdly, the code often outlined democratic principles. Many pirate ships voted on major decisions such as where to sail next or who to attack. Captains, while holding immense authority in battle, could often be voted out if they proved cowardly, tyrannical, or incompetent. The quartermaster, elected by the crew, often held as much, if not more, power than the captain outside of combat, serving as an arbiter of disputes and ensuring fair distribution of spoils. This surprisingly egalitarian structure appealed greatly to sailors fleeing the autocratic hierarchies of merchant and naval vessels. Historians still debate whether these pirate codes were truly an expression of early democratic ideals or simply pragmatic rules for managing a dangerous, chaotic enterprise. It's likely a bit of both, a necessary structure born out of expediency and a shared disdain for conventional authority. A quirky or off-topic fact, some pirate codes even included clauses about not discussing past grievances on board, essentially banning workplace drama to maintain harmony. If only modern offices had such clear-cut rules for avoiding gossip, right? And no, the pirate code didn't have a section about what to do if you ran out of crocodile poop sunscreen, because well, that's just a funny thing from our previous discussion, not something pirates actually used. The Pirate Code, both unwritten customs and formally penned articles, provides a fascinating glimpse into the internal world of pirate crews. It reveals that while they were criminals in the eyes of the law, they established their own form of rough justice and social order. It was this unique blend of freedom, shared risk, and harsh discipline that drew thousands of desperate men and women to hoist the Jolly Roger and embark on a life of plunder during the Golden Age. You've stepped aboard, familiarized yourself with the pirate code, and perhaps even signed your mark in blood, hopefully metaphorical for your sake. Now let's get down to the brass tacks. What was shipboard life's harsh reality? For a pirate, it wasn't all thrilling chases and buried treasure. Much of it was a monotonous, uncomfortable, and often brutal existence, demanding resilience and a high tolerance for unpleasantness. Imagine living in incredibly cramped quarters, often sharing a hammock with another sailor in shifts. Personal space was practically non-existent. Sanitation was rudimentary at best. The stench of unwashed bodies, stale food, bilge water, and gunpowder would have been pervasive. Food consisted largely of hardtack, a nearly indestructible biscuit, salted meat or fish, and whatever could be plundered or caught. Fresh water was a precious commodity, often quickly fouled, leading to reliance on grog rum mixed with water or watered-down beer. An authoritative historical fact, scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, was rampant on long voyages, often debilitating or killing more sailors than enemy cannon fire. You probably wouldn't survive this kind of diet and lack of hygiene for long without falling ill. Discipline, even under the pirate code, could be severe. While captains could be voted out, their authority in battle was absolute, and swift punishment awaited those who disobeyed. Flogging was common, and serious infractions could lead to marooning or death. Boredom was a constant companion during long stretches between engagements, leading to gambling, storytelling, and often drinking. When a prize was taken, it was often followed by a period of unrestrained revelry, but this quickly gave way to the mundane reality of maintaining a vessel and searching for the next target. Every man and occasionally woman had a specific role. While the captain led the quartermaster, was vital, overseeing discipline provisions and the fair division of plunder. Gunners were responsible for the cannons, boatswains for the rigging, and carpenters for repairs. Even cooks, despite their often unappetizing fare, were crucial. It was a well-oiled machine, albeit a grimy one, driven by the common goal of profit and survival. Imagine being the cook trying to whip up a gourmet meal with only hardtack and a barrel of questionable salted beef. Good luck getting a Michelin star. Historians still debate the true level of democracy on pirate ships. While the pirate code offered more egalitarianism than naval vessels, captains still wielded significant power, especially if they were successful. It was a fragile balance often dependent on the captain's charisma and the crew's satisfaction with their haul. A quirky or off-topic fact about shipboard life: sailors often developed incredibly strong superstitions. Black cats were sometimes kept on board as good luck charms, and whistling on deck was considered bad luck, as it could supposedly whistle up a gale. Perhaps that's why they stuck to shanties instead of show tunes. Despite the hardships, thousands chose this life. The appeal was not the comfort, but the freedom from the crushing oppression of the Royal Navy press gangs or the tyrannical merchant captains who might beat a sailor for a minor infraction. On a pirate ship, you had to say you got a fair share of the loot, and you lived by your own, albeit rough, rules. It was a dangerous trade, but for many it was a choice. A desperate grasp at autonomy on the brutal, unpredictable high seas. The taste of salt, the creak of timber, the constant uncertainty. This was the true sensory reality of life as a pirate. You've imagined the cramped quarters and the grim diet of a pirate's life, but none of that mattered if you couldn't actually get where you were going, or, more importantly, to where your next prize was. This brings us to the absolutely essential skills of navigation and seamanship that every successful pirate crew possessed. These weren't just brute fighters, they were skilled mariners, often more capable than the legitimate captains they preyed upon. Imagine being out on the vast open ocean with no land in sight, no GPS, and no reliable weather forecasts beyond the feel of the wind and the look of the clouds. Navigating in the 17th and 18th centuries was an intricate art relying on a combination of celestial observation, dead reckoning, and meticulous record-keeping. Pirates, often ex-merchant or naval sailors, would have been intimately familiar with these techniques. They used sextants, or earlier instruments like quadrants and astrolabes, to measure the angle of the sun at noon or the height of the North Star to determine their latitude. Longitude, notoriously difficult to calculate before accurate chronometers were widely available, was a constant challenge, often estimated by dead reckoning, a calculation of position based on speed, course, and time. Seamanship was equally vital. This encompassed everything from knowing how to handle sails in a gale, to expertly tying complex knots, to understanding the currents and tides of the Caribbean and beyond. A well-maintained ship was a pirate's lifeline, and every crew member, from the powder monkey to the captain, had to know their way around the rigging, how to identify a leak, or how to quickly make repairs in rough seas. An authoritative historical fact: many Golden Age pirate captains, such as Bartholomew Roberts and Edward Lowe, were highly skilled navigators and experienced sailors, a prerequisite for successfully leading voyages across vast distances and locating targets. You probably wouldn't survive this lifestyle if you got seasick easily or couldn't tell a sheet from a shroud. Pirates often targeted ships in specific choke points: narrow passages, busy shipping lanes, or near well-known trade hubs. This required not just good navigation to get there, but excellent seamanship to maintain station, chase down targets, and then successfully maneuver during a boarding action. A fast, well-handled ship was their primary weapon. They were constantly on the lookout for weather changes, knowing that a sudden squall could be either a blessing to escape a pursuing warship or a curse to wreck their own vessel. Historians still debate how much formal training these pirates had versus how much was learned on the job or passed down through oral tradition. It's likely a mix, with many having served long apprenticeships on legitimate vessels before turning pirate. A quirky or off-topic fact: early sailors often navigated by observing the flight patterns of birds or even the direction of ocean swells, particularly when close to land, almost like having a living, breathing compass. Imagine trying to explain that to a modern GPS system. And while they might have relied on crocodile poop sunscreen for strange reasons, they certainly relied on sharp wits and keen observation for navigation. The ability to navigate vast oceans and expertly handle a sailing ship was the backbone of pirate success. It allowed them to reach their hunting grounds, escape naval patrols, and consistently find new victims. Far from being uneducated brutes, many pirates were highly skilled professionals of the sea, their lives dependent on their mastery of windwave and star. Without these crucial skills, their daring exploits would have been impossible, and their reign on the high seas would have been short-lived indeed. So you understand that pirates were master mariners capable of navigating vast, unpredictable oceans. But once they spotted their prize, their mastery shifted from sails and stars to gunpowder and steel. This brings us to the crucial aspect of, weapons and tactics, employed by pirates during the Golden Age. It wasn't always a fair fight, but it was almost always terrifying. Imagine the typical scenario: a merchant ship, often lightly armed, lumbering across the waves. A pirate vessel, faster and more maneuverable, bears down on it, often flying a deceptive flag until the last moment, before hoisting the dreaded Jolly Roger. Remember its psychological impact from Part 9. The primary goal wasn't to sink the merchant ship, but to capture it intact along with its valuable cargo. This meant a focus on disabling the enemy and forcing a swift surrender, rather than prolonged, destructive cannonades. Their main offensive weapons were cannons. Pirate ships, especially larger ones, were typically armed with a range of cannons, from smaller swivel guns on the rails to larger, heavier guns on the main deck. These were used to target the enemy's rigging sails and rudder, aiming to immobilize the vessel. A broadside of cannon fire, though not always accurate, could be devastating to wooden ships. An authoritative historical fact is that Blackbeard famously armed his flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, with up to 40 cannons, making it a formidable floating fortress. You probably wouldn't survive this barrage if you were on the receiving end. Once the target was crippled or intimidated into surrender, the focus shifted to boarding. This was the moment of truth, a chaotic, brutal melee. Pirates would swing across on grappling hooks, ladders, or even jump directly onto the enemy deck. Their personal armaments were diverse: hamanin cutlasses, short, heavy swords, ideal for close quarters fighting in confined spaces; pistols, often carried in multiple pairs as they were slow to reload; muskets; and axes, or boarding pikes. The sheer number of pirates, often outnumbering the merchant crew, combined with their fearsome reputation and aggressive demeanor, often meant the fight was over quickly. They aimed to overwhelm, disarm, and subdue, rather than slaughter indiscriminately, especially if they wanted to recruit new crew members or ransom passengers. Their tactics often involved deception and surprise. They might approach slowly, pretending to be a distressed vessel or a friendly ship, before suddenly unfurling the Jolly Roger and unleashing their attack. Sometimes they would even fire warning shots or deliberately miss with initial volleys, emphasizing the choice: surrender peacefully and live, or resist and face the consequences. This was a psychological game as much as a physical one. Historians still debate the true effectiveness of pirate gunnery. While they had cannons, they often lacked the extensive training and discipline of regular naval gun crews, relying more on overwhelming numbers and close-range boarding actions. A quirky or off-topic fact: some pirates would light slow-burning fuses in their beards, like Blackbeard was rumored to do, or don intimidating, grotesque appearances to further terrorize their victims before boarding. Imagine seeing that coming at you. You'd probably surrender just to avoid having nightmares, and no, throwing crocodile poop sunscreen at them wasn't a recognized deterrent. The combination of naval experience, a willingness to employ brutal force, and shrewd psychological tactics made pirates incredibly effective at their trade. Their ships were designed for speed, their cannons for disabling, and their crews for overwhelming boarding actions. This mastery of maritime combat and intimidation was central to their success and contributed immensely to their fearsome legend, ensuring that the sight of a pirate ship on the horizon was a sailor's worst nightmare. You've imagined the terrifying spectacle of a pirate attack, the cannons roaring, the cutlasses clashing. Now let's talk about the payoff, the glittering promise that lured so many to hoist the Jolly Roger Hokaksha treasure. But before you picture overflowing chests of gold doubloons buried on desert islands, let's separate myth versus reality. The truth about pirate wealth is far more mundane yet still fascinating. Imagine the popular image, a tattered map with a giant X, a shovel and a chest overflowing with gold, jewels, and silver. This romanticized view of pirate treasure, largely popularized by authors like Robert Louis Stevenson, is mostly fiction. An authoritative historical fact is that genuine instances of pirates burying large hoards of treasure are exceedingly rare. The vast majority of pirate booty was perishable goods or currency that needed to be spent quickly. You probably wouldn't find a map to a hidden island fortune in the real world. So what was pirate treasure really? It was primarily merchandise, taken from merchant ships, textiles, spices, sugar, tobacco, cocoa, wine, spirits, tools, and sometimes slaves. Gold and silver coins were certainly sought after, but they were usually in the form of a ship's manifest or the personal wealth of passengers, not massive stockpiles. These goods were meant to be sold or bartered as quickly as possible upon reaching a friendly port or pirate haven like Tortuga. Remember, pirates weren't in the business of long-term investment, they were in the business of immediate gratification. They needed to convert their ill-gotten gains into provisions, rum, new equipment, and, of course, a good time. The idea of burying treasure largely stems from a few isolated, highly sensationalized cases, most notably that of Captain William Kidd, whose alleged buried treasure on Gardner's Island off Long Island, New York, became the basis for much of the myth. But even in Kidd's case, the amount was relatively small, and it was primarily buried as a temporary measure to avoid capture, not as a long-term retirement fund. Imagine trying to keep hundreds of tons of sugar or bolts of silk dry and safe in a hole in the ground for years. It's just not practical. Plus, pirates were notoriously untrustworthy even among themselves. Who would you trust to guard your buried fortune? You probably wouldn't survive if word got out that you had a secret stash. Historians still debate the enduring power of the buried treasure myth, questioning why it resonated so strongly with the public despite scant historical evidence. It likely taps into universal fantasies of sudden wealth and hidden secrets. A quirky or off-topic fact: the phrase "pieces of 8 Spanish silver dollars" became synonymous with pirate treasure because these coins were widely recognized and accepted as currency across the globe, making them ideal for trade and plunder. So while coins were real, finding millions of them in a chest was not. While pirates certainly acquired wealth, it was often short-lived. Much of it was squandered quickly on lavish spending sprees in port, on drink, gambling, and women. Their lives were dangerous and uncertain, so living for the moment was paramount. The true treasure for many pirates wasn't the gold itself, but the freedom and autonomy that piracy offered, however fleeting. That, and perhaps the sheer thrill of defying authority. So next time you see a pirate map, remember that the real adventure was in the chase and the camaraderie, not in the digging. And definitely no treasure chest of crocodile poop sunscreen either. You've learned that pirate treasure was less about buried gold and more about perishable goods and immediate gratification. But to enjoy that immediate gratification, pirates needed safe harbors where they could sell their plunder, resupply their ships, and escape the long arm of the law. While Tortuga, remember, Part 7 was an early stronghold, the Golden Age saw the rise of other equally notorious and vital pirate havens. Imagine a bustling, lawless port town where the authority of distant European monarchs held little sway. These havens weren't just places to hide, they were vital economic centers for the pirate economy. They offered a market for stolen goods, access to provisions, freshwater ship repair services, and perhaps most importantly, a place for pirates to blow off steam, gamble, and recruit new crew members. They were chaotic melting pots, drawing in merchants, prostitutes, artisans, and desperate sailors from all corners of the globe. One of the most famous and important of these later havens was Port Royal, Jamaica. In its heyday, particularly in the mid to late 17th century, under governors who tacitly encouraged buccaneering against the Spanish Port Royal, was described as the wickedest city on earth. It was a den of vice, luxury, and instant fortunes made from plunder. An authoritative historical fact, Port Royal was famously destroyed by an earthquake and tsunami in 1692, with much of the city sinking beneath the waves, often seen by some as divine retribution for its wickedness. Imagine the sheer chaos and devastation. You probably wouldn't survive this cataclysm. Another significant pirate haven was Nassau, on New Providence Island in the Bahamas. As privateering became less viable after the War of the Spanish Succession early 18th century, thousands of unemployed sailors and ex-privateers flocked to Nassau. Its shallow harbor made it difficult for large naval warships to enter, while its myriad coves and hidden channels provided excellent hiding places for smaller, faster pirate sloops. For a period, Nassau was essentially run by pirates, becoming a pirate republic where figures like Blackbeard and Benjamin Hornigold held sway. Imagine a town where pirates outnumbered legitimate citizens, dictating terms and living openly by their own rules. Other smaller havens existed across the Caribbean and along the North American coast, like the pirate enclaves in the Carolinas. These were often more temporary or less formally organized, serving as stopovers or places for individual crews to lay low. What all these havens shared was a combination of geographic advantage, difficult for navies to access weak or corrupt local governance, and a ready market for illicit goods. Historians still debate whether these pirate havens were truly self-governing republics or simply zones of limited or compromised imperial authority. They certainly functioned with a degree of autonomy, but they were still ultimately vulnerable to determine naval suppression, as Port Royal's fate, and later Nassau's, demonstrate. A quirky or off-topic fact about these havens: they were often surprisingly multicultural, with crews composed of men and women from across Europe, Africa, and the Americas, sharing languages, customs, and grievances. It was like a very dangerous, very drunk early version of a global village, where the main currency was stolen rum and promises of a quick death. These pirate havens were more than just hideouts. They were crucial logistical and social centers that enabled the golden age of piracy to flourish. They provided the infrastructure and the relative safety necessary for pirates to convert their plunder into power and pleasure, making them as essential to the pirate ecosystem as the fast ships and fearsome flags themselves. You've explored the notorious havens where pirates congregated, reveled, and plotted. Now let's bring to life one of the most iconic and terrifying figures of the Golden Age, Blackbeard. His name alone conjures images of smoke, fire, and an almost supernatural menace. Edward Teach, or Thatch as he was sometimes known, wasn't just a pirate. He was a master of psychological warfare, crafting a fearsome persona that became legendary. Imagine sailing the waters off the American colonies in the early 18th century. Suddenly you spot a large, powerful warship, its black sails billowing. As it approaches, you see a towering figure on the deck, his face framed by a wild black beard into which he reputedly wove lit fuses before battle. Smoke would wreathe around his head, giving him a demonic appearance. This was Blackbeard, and his theatrics were designed for one purpose: to inspire terror and compel immediate surrender without a single shot being fired. His most famous ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was a formidable vessel captured from the French and heavily armed with up to 40 cannons. An authoritative historical fact, recovered wreck site confirms this. You probably wouldn't survive this encounter if you chose to resist. Blackbeard's reign of terror was relatively short, peaking from around 1716 to 1718, but it was incredibly intense. He operated primarily along the North American coast and in the Caribbean, preying on merchant shipping and even blockading Charleston, South Carolina for several days to extort medical supplies. Unlike some pirates who were known for extreme cruelty, Blackbeard often preferred intimidation over bloodshed. His goal was to take plunder intact, and his terrifying image frequently achieved that without a fight. He was a shrewd tactician, understanding that a fearful reputation was a more efficient weapon than a cannonball. His story culminates in a dramatic showdown. Tired of his depredations, the governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, dispatched a naval expedition led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard to hunt him down. In November 1718, Maynard cornered Blackbeard's ship in an inlet off Ocracoke Island, North Carolina. What followed was a brutal hand-to-hand battle. Blackbeard himself fought ferociously, reportedly taking multiple gunshots and sword wounds before finally falling. An authoritative historical fact, Maynard's crew eventually prevailed, and Blackbeard's head was severed and displayed on Maynard's ship's bowsprit as proof of his death and a warning to other pirates. It was a grisly but effective end to his legendary career. Historians still debate whether Blackbeard truly was as cruel as his legend suggests, or if much of his terrifying reputation was carefully cultivated and exaggerated for psychological effect. It's likely a mix. You don't become the most feared pirate in history by being a gentle soul, but he certainly understood the power of a good, scary story. A quirky or off-topic fact about Blackbeard: he was known to have as many as 14 wives, though few of these were legal marriages, and many were likely short-lived arrangements in various port towns. He certainly wasn't afraid of commitment, just perhaps not to any one person or to the law. And no, he didn't need crocodile poop sunscreen. His beard and smoky visage were enough. Blackbeard's legacy transcends his short career. He solidified the image of the archetypal pirate, fearless, cunning, and utterly ruthless. His calculated theatrics and mastery of terror left an indelible mark on pirate lore, ensuring that his name would echo through history as the embodiment of the Golden Age pirate. His dramatic life and violent end became the stuff of legend, inspiring countless tales and forever shaping how we imagine the kings of the high seas. You've met the terrifying legend of Blackbeard, a pirate whose persona was as much a weapon as his cutlass. Now let's turn to a figure whose legacy is far more ambiguous, a man whose very status as a pirate is still hotly debated. Captain Kidd. His story is a tangled web of privateering accusations, hidden treasure, the basis for so many myths. Remember Part 14, and a dramatic downfall that captivated the public on both sides of the Atlantic. Imagine William Kidd, a respectable Scottish shipmaster and privateer operating in the late 17th century. He was hired by a consortium of powerful English lords, including the Governor of New York, to hunt down pirates in the Indian Ocean, specifically targeting French ships and notorious pirate vessels preying on rich Mughal trade. He sailed from England in 1696 aboard his ship, the Adventure Galley, fully commissioned with a letter of marque. This was a legitimate undertaking designed to protect English shipping and enrich his patrons. An authoritative historical fact: Kidd was initially commissioned as a privateer to suppress piracy and attack French ships, not to become a pirate himself. So how did a respectable privateer become branded one of the most infamous pirates in history? The Indian Ocean was vast and targets were scarce. Kidd's crew grew restless, demanding action and plunder. Under immense pressure and perhaps tempted by the vast wealth passing through those waters, Kidd eventually attacked ships that were not legitimate targets under his commission. Most notably, he captured the Quetta merchant, an Armenian ship flying French colors, but likely carrying goods for a prominent Mughal official. This act, whether a desperate measure or a calculated betrayal of his commission, sealed his fate. It was a fine line between privateer and pirate, and Kidd stumbled over it. You probably wouldn't survive this level of shifting allegiances without someone eventually wanting your head. Word of Kidd's actions spread, and he was branded a pirate. His powerful patrons, fearing for their own reputations, quickly disavowed him. Realizing his precarious position, Kidd buried a small portion of treasure, mostly gold, silver, and precious goods from the Queda merchant on Gardiner's Island off Long Island, hoping to use it as a bargaining chip to clear his name. This act, as we discussed, fueled centuries of treasure hunting fantasies. When he eventually sailed back to America, attempting to negotiate a pardon, he was arrested. Historians still debate whether Kidd was truly a villainous pirate or a victim of circumstances, a man caught between the unrealistic expectations of his patrons and a mutinous crew, forced by necessity to deviate from his commission. Some argue he was simply a privateer who made a few legally questionable decisions in a difficult environment. A quirky or off-topic fact about Kidd before his execution: his last words were reportedly an attempt to convince the crowd of his innocence, insisting he had a map that would lead to more treasure. Talk about a cliffhanger. He certainly knew how to work a crowd, even from the gallows. Kidd was transported back to England, put on trial for piracy and the murder of one of his crew, whom he struck with a bucket during an argument. Despite his pleas of innocence and claims that his actions were legitimate, he was found guilty and hanged in London in 1701. His body was displayed in an iron cage over the Thames as a warning to others, a grisly but common deterrence, a foreshadowing of our discussion in Part 23. Captain Kidd's controversial career serves as a stark reminder of the volatile nature of privateering and how easily a man could cross the line from commissioned hero to condemned pirate, forever altering his legacy and fueling generations of romantic myths. We've navigated the ambiguous career of Captain Kidd, a man caught between privateering and piracy. Now let's smash another stereotype of the Golden Age, the idea that piracy was exclusively a man's world. While undoubtedly male-dominated, history reveals that some of the most daring and formidable buccaneers were in fact women pirates. Figures like Anne Bonny and Mary Rideau. Their stories are as remarkable as any man's, shattering expectations and carving out a dangerous independent life on the high seas. Imagine the sheer audacity required for a woman to become a pirate in the early 18th century. It meant defying every social convention, risking discovery, and often living disguised as a man to avoid immediate prejudice, or worse. Yet against all odds, Anne Bonny and Mary Read rose to prominence, serving with distinction alongside male pirates and earning fearsome reputations in their own right. An authoritative historical fact is that Anne Bonny and Mary Read served under Captain Calico Jack Rackham and were known for fighting fiercely alongside the men during boarding actions. You probably wouldn't survive this lifestyle if you weren't incredibly tough and resourceful. Anne Bonny was Irish-born, likely around 1700. She sailed to the Caribbean, married a small-time sailor, but quickly fell for the charismatic pirate Captain John Calico Jack Rackham in Nassau. Remember our pirate havens from Part 15. She abandoned her husband, disguised herself as a man, and joined Rackham's crew. Stories say she was hot-tempered, brave, and utterly ruthless in battle, showing no quarter. Mary Read had an even more unusual path to piracy. Born in England, she was raised as a boy by her mother to conceal the death of her legitimate older brother and secure an inheritance. She served in the British Army and Navy, always disguised as a man, before eventually finding herself in the West Indies. After her ship was captured by pirates, she joined their ranks, eventually linking up with Calico Jack Rackham's crew, where she met Anne Bonny. Imagine two women both living as men fighting side by side in a brutal pirate battle while trying to keep their true identities secret from most of their crew. It's a plot worthy of any Hollywood blockbuster. Their partnership on Rackham's ship became legendary. When Rackham's ship was attacked by a privateer sent by the governor of Jamaica, most of the male crew were drunk and cowered below deck. It was Anne Bonny and Mary Read who, along with one other male pirate, bravely fought off the boarding party, cursing their male shipmates for their cowardice. This incredible display of courage cemented their reputations. Historians still debate the extent of their romantic relationship, if any, or if their bond was purely one of fierce camaraderie, forged in shared danger and defiance of gender norms. A quirky or off-topic fact about Anne Bonny: when Rackham was captured and about to be executed, she famously told him, "Had you fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." Talk about a brutal farewell from a partner, it just shows how uncompromising they were. And for these women, the idea of slathering on crocodile poop sunscreen would probably be the least of their worries. They were more concerned with keeping their true identities hidden and their cutlasses sharp. Ultimately, both Anne Bonny and Mary Read were captured alongside Rackham and condemned to hang. However, they both pleaded their bellies, claiming to be pregnant, which delayed their executions. Mary Read reportedly died in prison, likely from fever or complications of childbirth. Anne Bonny's fate is less certain. She disappears from the historical record, leading to speculation that her wealthy father might have intervened to secure her release. Regardless of their final days, their stories serve as powerful testaments to the extraordinary lives of women who defied societal norms and found a dangerous freedom on the pirate seas, becoming as formidable as any male pirate legend. From the fierce independence of female pirates Anne Bonny and Mary Read, we now pivot to perhaps the most unlikely character to ever hoist the Jolly Roger, Stady Bonnet, the gentleman pirate. His story is less about a hardened sailor turning rogue and more about a man of wealth and privilege who, for reasons still debated, chose to abandon his comfortable life for the dangers of piracy. Imagine a wealthy landowner in Barbados in the early 18th century. You own a profitable sugar plantation, have a wife and family, and enjoy all the comforts of colonial society. Most people would consider this the epitome of success. Yet in 1717, Stade Bonnet, a major in the Barbados militia, inexplicably decided to purchase a sailing sloop, name it the Revenge, equip it with 10 cannons, and remarkably, pay a crew of about 70 men to sail it under his command. He had virtually no prior sailing experience, much less any experience in commanding a vessel in battle. This self-styled transition to piracy is an authoritative historical fact, making him utterly unique among his contemporaries. You probably wouldn't survive this kind of career change without a massive dose of beginner's luck or an even bigger dose of delusion. Bonnet's motivations remain a mystery. Contemporary accounts suggest he was unhappy in his marriage and disordered in his mind, perhaps seeking an escape from domestic strife or the dullness of plantation life. Imagine abandoning your entire cushy existence for a life of scurvy cannonballs and rough company. It certainly wasn't a practical career move, more like a very extreme midlife crisis. His early exploits were predictably less than stellar. He was often seasick, inexperienced in navigation. Remember our discussion of those vital skills in Part 12, and reportedly left tactical decisions to his crew. He compensated for his lack of maritime prowess with his wealth, paying his crew regular wages, a rarity in piracy, where shares of plunder were the norm, and outfitting his ship lavishly, even including a small library on board. A quirky or off-topic fact, Bonnet apparently had a love for books and would spend time reading them during calmer periods at sea. Perhaps he was trying to figure out how to actually sail his ship from a manual, or maybe he was just brushing up on his pirate etiquette. Chapter 3: How to properly say "R." This unusual gentleman eventually crossed paths with the most infamous pirate of them all. Blackbeard, remember him from part 16. Blackbeard, recognizing Bonnet's lack of experience, but seeing the potential in his well-equipped ship, effectively took command of Bonnet's crew and vessel, relegating Bonnet to the status of a bewildered guest aboard his own ship. Bonnet briefly sailed as Blackbeard's guest, witnessing firsthand the brutal efficiency of a true pirate king. Historians still debate the true nature of Bonnet's sanity and the depth of his commitment to piracy. Was he genuinely seeking a new life of adventure, or was it a desperate attempt to escape his circumstances, poorly conceived and even more poorly executed? It's hard to imagine him slathering on crocodile poop sunscreen with the same gusto as his hardened crew, if indeed they even found any. Bonnet's brief and bumbling career as a pirate took a more desperate turn after he parted ways with Blackbeard. He attempted to operate independently, but his inexperience continued to plague him. His tale, however, comes to a swift and grim end. In September 1718, Bonnet and his crew were cornered in the Cape Fear River, North Carolina, by a colonial expedition led by Colonel William Rhett. After a fierce 6-hour battle, Bonnet surrendered. He was eventually tried for piracy in Charleston, South Carolina, found guilty and hanged in December 1718. His story serves as a fascinating outlier in the annals of piracy, a cautionary tale of a man who pursued a dangerous fantasy with tragic results, proving that even a gentleman's money couldn't buy him competent pirate skills. You've heard the curious tale of Stade Bonnet, the gentleman who bought his way into piracy. Now let's shift our focus from the men and women who sailed them to the vessels themselves. Pirate ships. These weren't just any old boats. They were often carefully chosen, skillfully modified, and fiercely maintained machines, purpose-built for the art of maritime plunder. Imagine the sheer variety. A pirate captain didn't just pick any ship. They needed a vessel that matched their strategy and the waters they intended to haunt. While large, heavily armed warships might seem ideal, they were often too slow and required too many men. Pirates generally favored speed and maneuverability to chase down merchant ships and escape naval patrols. An authoritative historical fact, the most common type of ship used by pirates in the Golden Age was the sloop, a single-masted vessel known for its speed and ability to sail well into the wind, making it excellent for chases and escapes in the often shallow waters of the Caribbean. You probably wouldn't survive a chase with a well-sailed sloop if you were on a slow-laden merchantman. Other popular choices included schooners, 2 masts, also fast and agile, and, occasionally, brigantines, or in square-rigged ships. Like Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge, a captured French slaver which was much larger and more heavily armed, but required a bigger crew. The key was versatility. Pirates needed ships that could be sailed efficiently with a relatively small crew, allowing for larger shares of plunder, could navigate shallow waters to hide in coves, and could be quickly adapted for battle. Once a ship was captured and designated a pirate vessel, it often underwent modifications. Pirates might add more cannons, often lighter ones that could be easily moved and pointed. They would sometimes strip away unnecessary bulkheads and cabins to create more open deck space for combat or to store larger amounts of plunder. The rigging might be adjusted for maximum speed. Decks were often sanded down to prevent slippage during bloody boarding actions. Imagine taking a perfectly good merchant ship and turning it into a lean, mean fighting machine designed for one purpose: taking other ships. It's like a medieval version of Pimp My Ride, but with more gunpowder and less chrome. The maintenance of these ships was paramount. Despite their often chaotic image, pirates were usually meticulous about their vessels. A leaky hull or fouled rigging meant the difference between a successful cruise and a watery grave. Carpenters and sailmakers were highly valued members of the crew, essential for repairs after battles or storms. Historians still debate whether pirate ships were truly faster than naval vessels on average, or if their reputation for speed was more due to the desperate motivations of their crews and their willingness to push their ships to the absolute limit. A quirky or off-topic fact about pirate ship design. Some pirates would intentionally try to make their ships look more intimidating. Beyond the Jolly Roger, they might paint their hulls black, or even carve grotesque figures on their bows. It was all part of the psychological warfare. Remember, Part 9 designed to strike fear before the first shot was even fired. And no, there's no historical evidence of pirates having designated sunbathing decks even if they did know about crocodile poop sunscreen. The choice and modification of their vessels were critical to pirate success. These ships were not merely transportation, they were the central tools of their trade, an extension of their power and their threat. They allowed pirates to operate effectively, to strike quickly, to escape efficiently, and ultimately to define an era of maritime lawlessness, cementing their place in history as masters of the waves. You've imagined the formidable ships pirates sailed, their sleek designs optimized for plunder. But what happened when the cannons fell silent, the plunder was spent, and the constant threat of the gallows loomed ever larger? This brings us to a less glamorous but equally compelling aspect of pirate life. Life after piracy retirement or ruin. Not every pirate ended up swinging from a gibbet. Some managed to escape the gallows, but finding a peaceful end was a challenge unto itself. Imagine a pirate, perhaps, after years of successful raiding, sensing the tide turning. Naval patrols were increasing, bounties were getting higher, and trusted havens were being swept clean like Nassau, which would soon be brought under control. For some, the smart move was to seek a pardon. Royal pardons, often offered to pirates who surrendered within a certain time frame, were a legitimate historical event, particularly the King's Pardon of 1718, which aimed to curb the widespread piracy of the Golden Age. Many pirates, including Benjamin Hornigold Blackbeard's former mentor and Henry Jennings, took this opportunity. Imagine trying to integrate back into polite society after years of plundering. You probably wouldn't survive this transition gracefully without a very convincing story about where all your wealth came from. For those who took the pardon, life could be surprisingly varied. Some genuinely retired, investing their ill-gotten gains in legitimate businesses, perhaps as tavern keepers or merchants. Others, like Benjamin Hornigold, even became pirate hunters for the authorities, turning their knowledge of pirate tactics and hideouts against their former brethren. A classic case of poacher turned gamekeeper. It's a quirky or off-topic fact that some pardoned pirates struggled with a return to normalcy, finding civilian life too dull or restrictive after the freedom of the seas. Imagine trading a life of adventure for accounting ledgers. Sounds like a step down, right? However, for every pirate who found a measure of peace, many more faced ruin. The most common fate, of course, was a capture and execution. As we'll discuss further, public hangings were a common deterrent meant to send a clear message. Others perished at sea, either in battle during storms or from disease. Remember scurvy from Part 11. Some were simply marooned by their own crews, left to die on a deserted island, a fate we touched upon in Part 10, a grim testament to pirate justice. Those who escaped capture often lived a life on the run, constantly looking over their shoulder. They might find temporary refuge in remote corners of the world, but the shadow of their past would always follow them. They couldn't simply walk into any port without fear of recognition and arrest. Their wealth, even if substantial, was often difficult to legitimize, and they might find themselves ostracized or cheated by those who knew their true identity. Historians still debate the precise number of pirates who successfully retired versus those who met a violent end, but the evidence suggests that a peaceful old age was the exception, not the rule. The choices made by pirates to seek pardon, to continue raiding, or to fight to the death were often desperate gambles. The allure of the pirate life was freedom and wealth, But the price for that freedom was constant danger and an almost certain grim end. The few who found retirement often did so by betraying their former code or by making pragmatic choices at just the right moment, showcasing that even in a life defined by lawlessness, there were still crucial decisions to be made. And no, there was no retirement plan that included a lifetime supply of crocodile poop sunscreen, unfortunately. You've learned about the varied, often grim fates awaiting pirates once their raiding days were done. But as the Golden Age reached its peak, a powerful counterforce began to mobilize the concerted efforts of national navies, marking a significant period where naval response intensified. The age of the freewheeling pirate was drawing to a close not just due to internal factors, but because the world's great powers finally decided to put their foot down. Imagine the economic and political damage caused by rampant piracy. Merchant shipping, the lifeblood of burgeoning empires, was constantly under threat. Insurance rates skyrocketed, trade routes became perilous, and colonial administrations faced constant disruption. Initially, European powers were often too busy fighting each other to focus solely on pirates, or they even tacitly supported privateers who skirted the line. But by the early 18th century, with major wars winding down, England in particular turned its formidable naval might towards the problem. The Royal Navy, a professional and increasingly powerful force, became the primary instrument of pirate suppression. They began dispatching squadrons specifically tasked with hunting down pirate vessels in their strongholds and along major trade routes. These were not small, nimble sloops, but heavily armed frigates and ships of the line capable of sustained engagements and carrying far more firepower than any pirate ship. An authoritative historical fact: the British Parliament passed the Piracy Act of 1717, allowing for vice admiralty courts in the colonies to try pirates without sending them back to England, streamlining the process and making justice swifter and harsher. This legal change, coupled with increased naval presence, was a critical turning point. You probably wouldn't survive this new relentless pursuit if you were a pirate. The tactics shifted. Navies didn't just patrol, they actively sought out pirate havens like Nassau. Remember that bustling den of thieves from Part 15. In 1718, Woodes Rogers, a former privateer himself, arrived in Nassau with a strong naval escort offering the king's pardon, as discussed in Part 21, to those who surrendered, and a noose for those who didn't. This combination of amnesty and overwhelming force effectively broke the back of the pirate republic in the Bahamas. Imagine being a pirate in Nassau, enjoying your rum, only to wake up one morning and see Royal Navy warships filling the harbor. Your party was officially over. Naval suppression involved more than just direct confrontation. They began enforcing strict maritime laws, establishing regular patrols, and collaborating with colonial governors to deny pirates safe havens and markets for their goods. The element of surprise, so crucial to pirate success, became harder to maintain. Pirates found themselves constantly on the run, their options dwindling, and the risk of capture dramatically increasing. Historians still debate whether the naval suppression was purely altruistic, aiming to secure trade, or if it was also a way for empires to exert firmer control over their colonies and curb the independence that piracy fostered. It was likely a blend of both motives. A quirky or off-topic fact about naval tactics: some naval captains would disguise their warships as merchant vessels sailing under false flags to lure unsuspecting pirates into an ambush. It was like a very dangerous game of cat and mouse with very high stakes. And no, a splash of crocodile poop sunscreen wasn't going to make your ship invisible to a Royal Navy frigate. The intensification of naval response signaled the beginning of the end for the golden age of piracy. The great powers were no longer willing to tolerate the disruption and defiance. With superior resources, organization, and a relentless commitment, they gradually squeezed the life out of the pirate menace, transforming the open seas from a lawless frontier into a more controlled, if still dangerous, domain of legitimate trade and imperial power. The consequences for captured pirates, as we'll soon see, were swift and brutally clear. You've witnessed the tightening grip of the Royal Navy effectively shutting down the pirate free-for-all. But what happened when that grip closed around a pirate, pulling them from their life of freedom and into the clutches of imperial justice? This brings us to the grim reality of execution and deterrence. The ultimate fate for most captured pirates often delivered with a public spectacle designed to terrify and discourage others. Imagine the scene: a bustling port town, a gallows erected prominently on the shore, perhaps at low tide, so the condemned would be slowly consumed by the rising waters. Thousands would gather eager for the morbid entertainment, a stark reminder of the consequences of challenging the king's authority. For a convicted pirate, the trial was often a swift formality, especially after the Piracy Act of 1717, an authoritative historical fact, remember from Part 22, which streamlined colonial trials. Confessions often extracted under duress were common, and the outcome was almost always death by hanging. You probably wouldn't survive this trial or the ensuing execution. The purpose of these public executions was not just retribution, it was primarily deterrence. The authorities wanted to send an unmistakable message to any sailor contemplating a life of plunder and to the general populace. Seeing a pirate swing from the gallows, perhaps with their body left to rot in an iron cage, a gibbet, as a decaying warning to passing ships, was meant to instill profound fear. Imagine sailing into a harbor and seeing the skeleton of a former pirate captain rattling in the wind, a chilling silhouette against the sky. It was a macabre monument to the power of the state. The rituals surrounding the executions were carefully choreographed to maximize their impact. Condemned pirates were often given a sermon by a minister urged to confess their sins and repent publicly. Their last words were eagerly anticipated, sometimes becoming part of pirate lore, or conversely used by authorities to reinforce the narrative of their wickedness. The procession to the gallows was a somber affair, designed to strip the condemned of any remaining dignity or heroic aura. Historians still debate the true effectiveness of public executions as a deterrent. While they certainly instilled fear and contributed to the decline of piracy, some argue that for desperate men with few other options, the allure of a brief, rich life still outweighed the risk of a gruesome end. A quirky or off-topic fact: sometimes the bodies of executed pirates would be tarred before being placed in gibbets, supposedly to preserve them longer, but also to make the spectacle even more grotesque and enduring. It's like an early, very unpleasant form of mummification for public display. And no tarring probably didn't feel as good as crocodile poop sunscreen, though both were certainly a commitment. The sheer brutality and public nature of these executions marked a decisive shift in how states dealt with piracy. It was no longer a nuisance to be tolerated or a convenient tool to be occasionally deployed. It was a crime against all nations, and the punishment was absolute. The gallows became the grim punctuation mark at the end of many pirate careers, closing the chapter on their daring lives and signaling the impending decline of their golden age. The fear of the noose was a far more effective weapon against piracy than any single naval broadside. You face the grim specter of the gallows, a chilling reminder of the state's determination to end the pirate menace. This relentless suppression, combined with broader global shifts, led inevitably to the end of the golden age of piracy. This wasn't a sudden dramatic curtain call, but a gradual winding down, a combination of converging factors that finally extinguished the flame of large-scale organized piracy in the Atlantic. Imagine the seas slowly becoming less welcoming to rogue vessels. By the mid-1720s, the heyday was undeniably over. Several key factors contributed to this decline. Firstly, and most significantly, was the intensified naval response. We discussed earlier, Part 22. Major European powers, especially Great Britain, poured resources into anti-piracy efforts. More warships patrolled trade routes, dedicated pirate hunters were commissioned, and vital pirate havens like Nassau, remember from Part 15, were systematically brought under firm government control. With fewer places to hide, fewer markets to sell plunder, and a constant threat of pursuit, the operational environment for pirates became incredibly difficult. Secondly, the offer of royal pardons, as discussed in Part 21, played a significant role. While not always successful, these pardons offered a pathway out for many pirates who were tired of the constant danger and knew the odds were increasingly stacked against them. For many, it was a chance to escape the noose and return to some semblance of legitimate life, even if it meant giving up their ill-gotten gains. This strategy effectively siphoned off a large number of experienced sailors who might otherwise have continued raiding. Thirdly, the resumption of legitimate opportunities. For employment at sea played a part, as wars between European powers flared up again in the mid-18th century, such as the War of Jenkins's Ear and the 7 Years' War. The demand for sailors in national navies and for privateering increased. This offered many unemployed mariners a legal and often safer alternative to piracy, with the promise of pay and even prizes, albeit under strict naval discipline. An authoritative historical fact is that by the 1730s, the numbers of active pirates in the Atlantic had dropped dramatically from their peak in the 1710s, illustrating the effectiveness of these combined efforts. You probably wouldn't survive as a pirate if all your potential recruits suddenly found honest work. Historians still debate which single factor was most decisive in ending the Golden Age. Was it primarily naval suppression, the lure of pardons, or the renewed opportunities in legitimate maritime service? It's likely a complex interplay, a confluence of pressures that made the pirate life increasingly unappealing and unsustainable. A quirky or off-topic fact: as the Golden Age waned, some former pirates even ended up as official executioners in port towns, having been spared the gallows themselves, but forced to administer justice to their former comrades. Talk about a grim career change. It's almost as wild as the idea of using crocodile poop sunscreen, but with actual consequences. The end of the Golden Age of piracy wasn't the end of piracy itself, but it marked the close of a unique era characterized by large, relatively organized pirate fleets, operating with a distinct culture and significant impact on global trade. The lessons learned from this period about maritime security and the socioeconomic conditions that breed lawlessness at sea continue to inform naval strategies even today. The romantic image of the swashbuckling pirate might endure, but the reality of their widespread reign of terror was decisively brought to an end by determined state power. You've witnessed the curtain fall on the Golden Age of piracy, a period of dramatic exploits and even more dramatic suppression. But while the major pirate fleets dispersed their impact on their primary hunting ground, the Caribbean, lingered long after the last Jolly Roger was hauled down. The islands and their people bore lingering scars from decades of lawlessness, violence, and economic disruption. Imagine the countless merchant families whose livelihoods were shattered, their ships seized, their fortunes lost. Imagine the coastal communities that lived in constant fear of raid and plunder, their homes burned, their people captured or killed. The economic development of many islands was significantly hampered. Trade routes that were once bustling became dangerous, discouraging legitimate commerce and investment. The costs of doing business soared due to higher insurance premiums and the need for armed escorts. An authoritative historical fact is that the economic losses due to piracy during its peak in the early 18th century were substantial, impacting global trade and colonial economies across the Atlantic. You probably wouldn't survive as a small-time merchant if your entire livelihood could be wiped out in a single pirate attack. Beyond the immediate economic damage, there was a profound social and political impact. The constant threat of piracy destabilized colonial governments, forcing them to divert resources from development to defense. It fostered a climate of fear and distrust, even among legitimate traders who might be tempted to turn pirate themselves if the opportunity arose. The very fabric of society in some areas was frayed by the pervasive lawlessness. Imagine trying to build a stable community when the threat of marauders is a daily reality. The legacy of piracy also influenced settlement patterns. Many legitimate settlements were forced to build defenses, relocate away from vulnerable coastal areas, or decline altogether. The vibrant, chaotic pirate havens we discussed, remember Port Royal and Nassau from Part 15, once bustling centers of illicit trade either became legitimate administrative hubs through force or faded into obscurity, their past lives as pirate strongholds gradually forgotten or romanticized. Historians still debate the extent to which piracy permanently stunted the economic growth of certain Caribbean islands versus merely redirecting wealth through illicit channels. Some argue that pirates, by circulating wealth however ill-gotten, did contribute to local economies in their havens, albeit in a chaotic and unsustainable way. A quirky or off-topic fact about the lingering scars, the folklore of many Caribbean islands still includes tales of hidden pirate treasure, influencing generations of local legends and even attracting modern-day treasure hunters. So the myth persisted, long after the reality. Perhaps they were looking for that fabled stash of crocodile poop sunscreen, who knows? The human cost was immeasurable: lives lost, families torn apart by capture or enslavement, and the psychological trauma of living under constant threat. Even after the major pirate captains were hanged and their fleets dispersed, the reputation of the Caribbean as a dangerous, lawless sea lingered for decades. It took a long time for legitimate trade to fully recover and for colonial powers to establish firm control over the region. The scars of the golden age of piracy run deep in the Caribbean. They remind us that historical phenomena, even those as seemingly adventurous as piracy, have profound and lasting consequences on real people and real places. The romantic image might be captivating, but the historical reality was often brutal, leaving behind a legacy that shaped the region for centuries. The end of an era brought a different kind of quiet, but not necessarily immediate peace. You've reflected on the lingering scars of the Golden Age in the Caribbean. But piracy, like an adaptable virus, wasn't confined to the Atlantic. As trade routes expanded and empires stretched their influence across the globe, so too did the shadow of maritime predation. This brings us to a brief look at piracy's Pacific expansion, demonstrating that the allure of plunder knew no geographical bounds. Imagine the vastness of the Pacific Ocean in the centuries after European contact, a colossal expanse dotted with countless islands, many unexplored, and long, vulnerable trade routes connecting the Americas with Asia. Spanish galleons laden with silver from the mines of Peru and Mexico sailed annually across the Pacific to the Philippines, the Manila galleon trade where they exchanged their treasure for silk, spices, and porcelain from China. These were incredibly rich prizes, tempting targets for any adventurous rogue with a fast ship and a hungry crew. While not as concentrated or as famous as the Atlantic's Golden Age, instances of piracy certainly occurred. English privateers like Sir Francis Drake, remember him from Part 5, even ventured into the Pacific in the late 16th century, surprising Spanish settlements and ships that considered themselves safe from European rivals on that side of the world. Later, during the 17th and 18th centuries, some Golden Age pirates fleeing the intensifying naval suppression in the Atlantic rounded Cape Horn, or the Cape of Good Hope, seeking new hunting grounds in the less patrolled waters of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. An authoritative historical fact is that figures like Henry Avery and William Kidd, remember his controversial career from Part 17, operated extensively in the Indian Ocean targeting East India Company and Mughal ships, often bringing their ill-gotten gains back via the Pacific. You probably wouldn't survive this kind of globe-trotting piracy without incredible navigational skills and a lot of luck avoiding major naval powers. These Pacific pirates often operated on a grander scale, undertaking longer voyages and targeting much larger, more valuable ships. The distances involved meant that any captured goods had to be either easily transported or highly valuable, like precious metals or luxury items. Resupply points were few and far between, demanding greater self-sufficiency and planning. Imagine trying to find a friendly port or a hidden cove for repairs after a battle when the nearest civilization might be thousands of miles away. Historians still debate the true extent and impact of European-style piracy in the Pacific compared to the Atlantic. Was it a constant, widespread threat, or more sporadic and opportunistic? The sheer size of the ocean meant that pirate activity was more dispersed and harder to track. A quirky or off-topic fact about Pacific voyages: during these long journeys, sailors often faced extreme boredom, leading to impromptu theatrical performances, gambling, and even competitive rat-catching to pass the time. So even on the other side of the world, pirate entertainment was rustic, to say the least. And they certainly weren't thinking about crocodile poop sunscreen when they were dodging typhoons or Spanish patrols. The presence of piracy in the Pacific highlights the universal nature of maritime predation, driven by the lure of trade and wealth. While the Golden Age narrative largely focuses on the Atlantic, it's important to remember that the thirst for plunder was a global phenomenon, adapting to different environments and challenges. These distant exploits, though less celebrated in Western lore, paved the way for even larger, more organized pirate forces to emerge in other parts of the world, particularly in Asia, which we'll explore next. You've glimpsed piracy's reach across the vast Pacific, confirming that the lure of plunder was truly global. But to understand piracy on a scale almost unimaginable to Westerners, we must now journey to the bustling, intricate waterways of Asia, where Chinese pirates forged fleets so vast and powerful they rivaled and sometimes surpassed national navies. This was piracy as a truly grand, organized enterprise. Imagine the South China Sea in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Forget single ships or small squadrons. Picture hundreds, even thousands of junks and other vessels flying distinctive flags, operating under sophisticated command structures. This was the era of the great Chinese pirate confederations, operating with a level of organization and military might that dwarfed anything seen in the Caribbean. Their targets were rich merchant junks, fishing fleets, and often coastal towns and villages, which they raided for tribute, plunder, and captives. An authoritative historical fact is that the largest of these confederations, led by Zheng Yi and later his widow Qing Shi, commanded a fleet of over 1,800 ships and more than 60,000 pirates in the early 19th century, making it arguably the largest pirate fleet in history. You probably wouldn't survive this kind of encounter, whether on land or at sea, if you were a local merchant or fisherman. These Chinese pirates weren't just opportunistic raiders. They were often powerful warlords, controlling vast territories along the coast, levying taxes, and even offering protection to local communities in exchange for tribute. Their motivations were complex, blending economic necessity, political rebellion against the Qing dynasty, and pure criminal enterprise. Many were former fishermen, smugglers, or disaffected peasants driven to piracy by poverty, famine, and official corruption. Their ships, primarily junks, were sturdy, versatile vessels, often heavily armed with cannons and armed crews. They operated in highly disciplined squadrons, using sophisticated signals and battle tactics. They understood the currents and shoals of the intricate coastal waters, intimately, giving them a significant advantage over less experienced government forces. Imagine the coordination required to manage thousands of vessels, directing them in complex maneuvers against both merchant ships and imperial fleets. It was a logistical marvel, albeit a criminal one. Historians still debate the precise balance between legitimate trade and outright piracy in the lives of many Chinese maritime communities. The lines were often blurred with seasonal shifts between fishing, trading, smuggling, and raiding. A quirky or off topic fact about Chinese pirates: many of these pirate groups had specific color flags like the Red Flag Fleet or Black Flag Fleet to distinguish their confederations, much like modern gangs, but with far more firepower. It's like they had their own pirate fashion show, but instead of designer clothes, it was about showing off your fearsome affiliation. And no, a splash of crocodile poop sunscreen wasn't going to make you inconspicuous to a vigilant pirate squadron. The sheer scale and sophistication of Chinese piracy stands as a testament to the enduring human capacity for maritime lawlessness when conditions are ripe. Unlike their Western counterparts, who often sought a brief dramatic career, many Chinese pirate families sustained their operations for generations, becoming entrenched powers in their regions. Their stories, though less known in the West, are a vital chapter in the global history of piracy, leading us directly to arguably the most successful pirate commander of all time, who we'll meet next. You've imagined the staggering scale of Chinese piracy with fleets numbering in the thousands. But within this enormous male-dominated world, one figure rose to become arguably the most successful pirate commander in all of history, male or female. Qing Shi, the Pirate Queen. Her story is a remarkable testament to leadership strategy and sheer force of will, making her a legend in her own right. Imagine a woman in the early 19th century, a former Cantonese prostitute who, by a twist of fate, married Zheng Yi, the charismatic leader of the Red Flag Fleet, the largest pirate confederation in China. Upon his accidental death in 1807, she didn't simply fade into the background. Instead, through shrewd negotiation and an iron will, she solidified her control over her deceased husband's vast fleet. Her name, Qing Shi, meaning Zheng's widow, became synonymous with unmatched power and tactical brilliance. An authoritative historical fact is that Qing Shi commanded a fleet of over 1,800 junks and 60,000 to 80,000 pirates, men, women, and children at her peak, a force larger than many national navies of the time. You probably wouldn't survive this level of power if you were a rival pirate captain or a Qing dynasty admiral sent to defeat her. Qing Shi wasn't just a figurehead. She was a masterful strategist and administrator. She implemented a strict and highly detailed code of laws for her confederation, far more comprehensive than any pirate code seen in the Caribbean. Remember those from Part 10. Her code dictated everything from the fair distribution of plunder and provisions to rules against insubordination, desertion, and even specific rules regarding the treatment of female captives. For instance, any pirate found raping a female captive would be executed. If a consensual relationship formed, it had to be registered, and the pirate had to remain faithful to that woman. These weren't just guidelines. Violations were met with brutal punishments, including flogging, ear-slitting, and decapitation. Under her command, the Red Flag Fleet became an unstoppable force. They defeated Qing dynasty naval forces repeatedly, even capturing government officials and forcing them to negotiate. They also successfully fought against the British and Portuguese navies, who were called upon to assist the beleaguered Chinese government. Imagine the humiliation for these established naval powers to be outmaneuvered and defeated by a pirate queen and her vast fleet of junks. It must have been truly baffling for them, like trying to herd cats. But the cats have cannons. Historians still debate the true source of Qing Shi's remarkable authority. Was it her shrewd political acumen, her ruthlessness, or her ability to inspire fierce loyalty from her adopted son and lover, Chung Po Tsai, who served as her principal commander? It was likely a combination of these factors. A quirky or off-topic fact about Qing Shi: she eventually negotiated a highly favorable amnesty for herself and her entire fleet, with the Qing government in 1810, allowing her to retire from piracy with her immense wealth and even established a salt trading monopoly. Talk about a successful career change. She certainly knew how to play the long game, unlike many of her Western counterparts. Qing Shi's story is an anomaly, a singular testament to female power and strategic genius in an era and industry where it was almost unheard of. She not only survived, but thrived building an empire of piracy that operated with unparalleled efficiency and might. Her retirement on her own terms stands in stark contrast to the grim end faced by most Western pirates. Remember Part 23. She truly was the Pirate Queen, a figure whose legend deserves far wider recognition for her unparalleled success in a world utterly dominated by men. And no, she certainly wasn't concerned with whether her crocodile poop sunscreen was ethically sourced. You've marveled at the unprecedented scale and success of Qing Shi, the Pirate Queen. But as the 19th century advanced, the golden age of piracy in the West, and even the Grand Chinese Confederations largely faded, suppressed by powerful navies and the rise of more stable global trade. You might think piracy became a relic of the past, a dusty footnote in history books. Yet the unfortunate truth is that modern piracy's persistence continues to plague maritime trade in various parts of the world, adapting to new technologies and geopolitical realities. Imagine a sleek modern cargo ship, a behemoth carrying thousands of containers filled with consumer goods, quietly steaming across seemingly peaceful waters. Suddenly from the horizon, a small, fast skiff appears, often unarmed at first glance, but quickly revealing a determined crew armed with automatic weapons and grappling hooks. This isn't a scene from a historical drama. It's a terrifying reality for sailors today, a chilling reminder that the core motivations for piracy, greed, desperation, and opportunity remain unchanged. Modern piracy isn't about buried treasure maps or romanticized adventure. It's a calculated, often brutal criminal enterprise focused on ransoming crews, stealing valuable cargo, or sometimes even hijacking entire vessels for their valuable scrap metal. The targets are often vulnerable merchant ships sailing through regions with weak or corrupt governance, or where naval patrols are stretched thin. An authoritative historical fact is that the International Maritime Bureau (IMB) records hundreds of incidents of piracy and armed robbery against ships annually, demonstrating its ongoing global presence. You probably wouldn't survive this encounter without sophisticated anti-piracy measures or a very swift response from security forces. The hotspots of modern piracy have shifted over time. While the Caribbean is generally safe now, other regions have emerged. The waters off West Africa, particularly the Gulf of Guinea, have seen a significant increase in attacks, often involving violent kidnappings for ransom. Southeast Asia, especially the Strait of Malacca and the waters around Indonesia, has long been a notorious region for armed robbery against ships with pirates, often targeting smaller vessels and siphoning off oil cargo. Imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of trying to secure thousands of miles of coastline and countless small islands. It's an almost impossible task. The tactics of modern pirates are often low-tech but effective. They rely on speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. Small, fast boats, skiffs launched from larger motherships, often converted fishing trawlers or dhows, allow them to approach targets undetected. Ladders and grappling hooks are still used for boarding, but their weaponry is modern. AK-47s, rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, and sometimes even heavier machine guns. It's like a blend of ancient methods with modern firepower. Historians still debate whether modern piracy is a direct continuation of historical piracy or a distinct phenomenon driven by new socio-economic factors. It's likely a complex mix with historical precedents informing current methods. A quirky or off-topic fact about modern piracy. Some anti-piracy security teams on cargo ships now employ non-lethal deterrents like acoustic devices that blast ear-splitting sounds or even high-pressure water cannons to repel boarders without resorting to deadly force. It's a bit like giving them an instant painful shower, but without the soap. And thankfully, there's no evidence of modern pirates or their victims relying on crocodile poop sunscreen anymore. The persistence of modern piracy underscores the enduring challenges of maritime security in a globalized world. It's a stark reminder that while the romantic image of the Golden Age pirate might entertain us, the reality of modern piracy is a serious threat to global trade and the lives of countless seafarers demanding ongoing vigilance and international cooperation. You've grappled with the surprising persistence of modern piracy in various global hotspots. Now let's zero in on the region that for a significant period, in the late 2000s and early 2010s, became almost synonymous with the term modern piracy, the dramatic rise of Somali piracy. This was a phenomenon driven by a unique confluence of geopolitical instability, economic desperation, and a strategic choke point in global shipping. Imagine the waters off the Horn of Africa, particularly the Gulf of Aden and the broader Indian Ocean. This narrow passage connects the Suez Canal and thus European trade with Asia, carrying an immense volume of global shipping, tens of thousands of vessels annually. For years following the collapse of Somalia's central government in 1991, its coastline became a lawless frontier. Overfishing by foreign trawlers often illegally decimated local fish stocks, depriving coastal communities of their traditional livelihood. This environmental and economic collapse, combined with widespread poverty and the availability of cheap former military weapons, created fertile ground for maritime banditry. Initially, some Somali fishermen formed armed groups to try and protect their waters from foreign trawlers. However, this quickly morphed into outright piracy, targeting the lucrative merchant ships transiting their coast. The tactics were crude, but effective small fast skiffs often launched from a larger mothership. Remember those from Part 29 would race towards a slow-moving cargo vessel. Pirates, armed with AK-47s and RPGs, would use ladders and grappling hooks to board. An authoritative historical fact is that in 2011, Somali pirates launched 237 attacks and held 30 vessels and 600 hostages for ransom, marking the peak of their activity. You probably wouldn't survive this kind of boarding action without being taken hostage and enduring a terrifying ordeal. The primary motivation was, ransom. Unlike historical pirates who sought direct plunder, Somali pirates aimed to capture ships and their crews and hold them for months, sometimes years, until multi-million-dollar ransoms were paid by shipping companies or governments. This created a lucrative, though dangerous, business model that poured vast sums of illicit money into impoverished Somali communities, further entrenching the practice. Imagine being a shipping company executive, faced with the agonizing decision of paying millions or leaving your crew in the hands of desperate armed men. The sheer scale of Somali piracy in its heyday caused massive disruption to global trade. Shipping companies rerouted vessels, increasing journey times and fuel costs. Some began employing armed security guards on board, effectively turning merchant ships into mini fortresses. The international community, initially slow to respond, eventually realized the gravity of the threat. Historians still debate the extent to which initial Coast Guard actions against illegal fishing genuinely morphed into pure piracy, or if it was always driven by criminal intent. It's likely a complex evolution. A quirky or off-topic fact about Somali piracy: some pirate gangs reportedly used satellite phones and GPS technology not just for navigation, but to track and target ships and to negotiate ransoms, a stark contrast to the low-tech methods of their boarding parties. It's like combining Stone Age weapons with space-age communication. And no, a supply of crocodile poop sunscreen wouldn't help you negotiate a ransom. The rise of Somali piracy highlighted the vulnerabilities of global shipping in a world where lawless zones persist. It forced the international community to acknowledge that piracy wasn't just a historical footnote, but a persistent, evolving threat that demanded a coordinated and robust response. This urgent need for action would eventually lead to unprecedented international anti-piracy efforts, which we'll explore next. You've witnessed the dramatic rise of Somali piracy, a stark reminder that the historical scourge of the seas continues to manifest in new forms. This modern threat demanded a modern, concerted global effort, leading to an unprecedented intensification of anti-piracy efforts today. The international community, realizing the severe disruption to global trade and the danger to seafarers, finally united to push back. Imagine a vast naval armada comprised of warships from dozens of nations, not fighting each other, but working together to protect shipping lanes. This is precisely what emerged in response to Somali piracy. Fleets from the United States NATO, the European Union Operation, Atalanta China, India, Japan, and other countries began patrolling the Gulf of Aden and the broader Indian Ocean. This coordinated international naval presence was an authoritative historical fact, representing one of the largest peacetime naval deployments in modern history. You probably wouldn't survive this level of coordinated military might if you were a pirate in a small skiff. These anti-piracy efforts involved multiple layers of defense. Firstly, naval patrols. Actively intercepted pirate motherships and skiffs, often engaging them directly. They established transit corridors and provided escorts for vulnerable merchant vessels. Secondly, self-protection measures. On-board merchant ships became standard. This included hardening ships with razor wire and water cannons, increasing speed in high-risk areas, and implementing citadels, secure rooms where crew members could shelter during an attack. Many ships also began employing armed security guards, effectively turning them into private floating fortresses. Imagine a cargo ship now looking more like a warship, complete with armed personnel. Thirdly, legal and intelligence efforts were ramped up. International cooperation in intelligence sharing helped identify pirate networks and their shore bases. Nations worked to establish legal frameworks for prosecuting captured pirates, ensuring they faced justice rather than simply being released. This was a complex undertaking, as legal jurisdictions on the high seas can be murky. The combination of these efforts proved highly effective. Attacks by Somali pirates plummeted dramatically after 2011. While incidents still occur, the large-scale hijackings for multi-million-dollar ransoms have largely ceased. This success story stands as a testament to what can be achieved when nations cooperate to address a common maritime threat. However, the challenge is ongoing. Piracy hotspots shift, and economic desperation in coastal communities remains a root cause. The tactics constantly evolve, requiring continuous adaptation from anti-piracy forces. Historians still debate whether the long-term solution to piracy lies purely in military suppression or primarily in addressing the underlying socio-economic factors that drive people to it. It's like trying to put out a fire by only dousing the flames without ever turning off the gas leak. A quirky or off-topic fact about modern anti-piracy: some anti-piracy units have experimented with dazzlers, non-lethal lasers designed to temporarily blind and disorient pirates approaching a ship rather than using firearms immediately. It's like a very high-tech blinding flashlight, but hopefully more effective than our old friend crocodile poop sunscreen. The global response to modern piracy demonstrates that while the allure of plunder might persist, determined, coordinated efforts can effectively mitigate even widespread threats on the high seas. It's a continuous battle, but one where the forces of law and order have for now gained a significant upper hand, ensuring that the vast majority of goods and people can traverse the world's oceans in relative safety. You've explored the past and present of piracy, from ancient rogues to modern-day threats and the global efforts to combat it. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of piracy isn't the historical reality, but its boundless presence in our collective imagination. Piracy in popular culture. From classic literature to blockbuster films and video games, pirates have captured our hearts, becoming symbols of freedom, adventure, and rebellion, often far removed from their brutal historical counterparts. Imagine the countless stories you've encountered: Captain Hook from Peter Pan, Long John Silver from Treasure Island, or the whimsical antics of Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean. These characters and the worlds they inhabit have shaped our perception of piracy, turning ruthless criminals into romantic anti-heroes. The High Jolly Roger, once a terrifying symbol of death, is now a playful emblem on children's toys. The Buried Treasure Map, a rare historical occurrence, is a staple of countless adventures. This widespread and often romanticized portrayal is an authoritative historical fact in itself, demonstrating the enduring power of myth-making. You probably wouldn't survive a real pirate encounter if you expected it to be as charming as a Hollywood movie. The allure lies in the idea of ultimate freedom, sailing the open seas, answerable to no one, living by your own rules, and seeking fortune on your own terms. It's a powerful fantasy, a rejection of societal norms and mundane life, which resonates deeply in an increasingly regulated world. The imagery is compelling: epic sea battles, exotic islands, hidden caves filled with glittering loot, and characters with distinctive quirks and memorable catchphrases. It's a perfect recipe for escapism. Literature played a huge role in this transformation. Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, 1883, almost single-handedly cemented many of the pirate clichés we cherish today, including the one-legged pirate with a parrot, the treasure map, and pieces of eight. Remember our discussion of that coin from part 14. Before Stevenson, pirates were generally viewed as villains. Afterward, they began their slow ascent to swashbuckling heroes. Hollywood later amplified these images with Errol Flynn's dashing Captain Blood or Johnny Depp's eccentric Jack Sparrow, further blurring the lines between historical fact and delightful fiction. Historians still debate whether this widespread romanticization of piracy undermines a proper understanding of its brutal historical reality, or if it serves as a harmless outlet for escapist fantasy. It's a quirky or off-topic fact that some academic conferences on maritime history even include sessions on pirate cosplay, showing the crossover appeal. Who knew historical accuracy could be so fashionable? And no, you won't find a cinematic hero trying to apply crocodile poop sunscreen, because some things just don't make for good box office. From children's books to video games like Assassin's Creed Black Flag, pirates continue to be a powerful archetype. They represent rebellion against authority, the thrill of the unknown, and the pursuit of adventure, however dangerous. This enduring presence in popular culture ensures that the legend of the pirate, far removed from the historical realities of scurvy, brutal discipline, and grisly ends, will continue to sail on, captivating new generations and fueling dreams of a life lived on the wild, open sea. Word count 102. The anchors have been weighed, the sails unfurled, and our long voyage through the history of pirates has come to its peaceful conclusion. Feel the gentle sway of the ship, the soft breeze on your face as the last rays of moonlight reflect on the calm waves. The shouts of battle, the clang of steel, the roar of cannons, they fade, now replaced by the quiet lull of the ocean. The tales of daring captains, fierce women, and hidden treasures. They linger like the scent of salt in the air, transforming from harsh reality into the soft whispers of legend. Remember the journey, the courage, the choices made on the edge of the law. Let the images drift away, dissolving like morning mist over the tranquil sea, leaving only the quiet comfort of understanding. Sleep now and dream of calm waters. Good night.